Okay, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for coming. Thanks, Dave, for that warm welcome. And I am very excited to be here, and I'm always very excited to talk about mushrooms. And just to give you a little bit of background about myself, as Dave just mentioned, and just let me know how the volume is. I'm speaking loudly, but I hope everyone can hear me in the back. I do work, or I have been working at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine as a teaching assistant and supervisor in the teaching clinic. I've also been in practice for the last 10 years. And as a side gig, I have the pleasure of going around and getting to speak to folks in the community, retailers, about products that I think are really great that are offered through a company named Tallgrass, of which obviously the host defense mushrooms is one of those lines. One of the reasons why I'm particularly excited to be here, and when I understood sort of the idea behind this talk, was that the reason why I became a naturopath was, and the reason why I teach at the college, is because pretty much the most favorite part of my job is educating my patients and my students. I get a huge amount of satisfaction from empowering people with really meaningful information. So when I was asked to speak about mushrooms tonight, we could spend days on days speaking about mushrooms, but I knew I only had about an hour and a bit with you all. So what I thought would be important to do was give you some context. And so what I mean by that was to start by chatting a little bit about how we got to where we are today. We didn't just sort of fall into 2015. There's a lot that's happened to bring us to this place. And in doing that, I also want to examine the idea or the concept of food as medicine. Because I feel if you are all on side with the idea of food as medicine, then it will be quite natural to talk about mushrooms. So we'll start talking a little bit about that. And please do jot down your questions. There will be time at the end for them. So does anyone know who this is? Oh, it tells you right there. Sorry. That's Hippocrates. Most of you, I'm sure, have heard of Hippocrates. He was a physician around 400 BC. And he said something that resonates around the world. People hear this quote, but I don't know how much we often think about it. Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food. This was something that has been popularized. People talk about it, but I don't feel like people really sink their teeth, no pun intended, into it and really delve into it. I feel like we've kind of bounced back to this because people are rediscovering the power of food, but I really take this near and dear to my heart. So this is a bit of a busy slide, but what I wanted to explore with you all is where we are today. So what is the paradigm of modern medicine, or what we call allopathic or conventional medicine? It's quite different from what I do and what Dave does. We are naturopathic doctors, or to be naturopathic doctors. So what is an allopathic doctor? What is a medical doctor? Well, the term allo comes from the Greek root, which means other. And it's really based on a system of medicine which means to counter or to treat symptoms as other, right? That's the whole paradigm of that system of medicine. It was based and really popularized, especially when Louis Pasteur came along. Who here has heard of Louis Pasteur? Yes, most everyone. So Louis Pasteur was around in the 1860s, and he became very popular because he was the one who found that one organism under his microscope, and he had that eureka moment where he said, aha, this agent causes this disease. It's what they call the doctrine of specific etiology. Etiology means cause. It's a fancy word for cause. So the whole paradigm in medicine quite quickly shifted. Instead of looking at multiple factors in terms of disease causes, medicine really became quite reductionistic. It said there is one factor that now causes one disease. And really our modern approach, this allopathic approach, really took off from that point. Okay? So that's where we've come from, and that's what's been going on for the last 150, 200 years. Well, where has it brought us to? So where are we at? Do we think that we're healthy as a society? I'm not quite sure. Right now we have a pretty obvious burden of chronic disease. So there are 4 diseases that make up this category. And I will tell you, sadly, that between 60 and 70% of deaths are attributable to these 4 main diseases. This includes cancer. This includes diabetes. CVD stands for cardiovascular disease, and we're talking also about chronic respiratory diseases, things like COPD. Okay? So when you look at the statistics, it becomes quite grim. They say 2 out of 5 people will develop cancer in their lifetime, and I'm sure every person in this room has either been personally touched or has a family member or someone they know that has been affected by one of these diseases. This is all too common. There is a massive economic burden associated with these diseases, and unfortunately my statistics are a little bit outdated. I can tell you in the year 2000, just cardiovascular disease alone cost healthcare over $20 billion. Okay? We know that prescriptions, I believe there were somewhere in the range of 65 million prescriptions written in 2005 for cardiovascular disease alone. This number is only going higher. There is a massive, what we call psychosocial impact of these diseases. So these diseases are not just affecting people's bodies. These diseases are affecting the mind and the spirit of the people who are dealing with them. And I think it stands to reason that they're affecting their loved ones and their communities. As Dave mentioned earlier, when you're healthy, it has an impact, a ripple effect on your community as well and on your family. So we know that 1 out of 5 people who have IHD, ischemic heart disease, it's sort of a fancy way of talking about a heart attack or a stroke, up to 2 out of 5 people with congestive heart failure, and even 1 out of 3 people after a heart attack go on to develop clinical depression. So this is, we're not just talking about physical disease, we're talking about mental health as well. So this is a really big part of what our society is dealing with right now. So that was the bad news, okay? So hopefully, you know, what we're gonna do is balance that out with the good news. The good news, we have these 4 big diseases in this big category. The very good news is that all 4 of them have modifiable risk factors, all 4 of them. And they all have 4 common modifiable risk factors. So carrying extra weight, being overweight or obese is a modifiable risk factor that can contribute to any one of those. Being physically inactive, so not participating in enough activity, not being active enough, is a contributing modifiable risk factor. Smoking, we know this. Smoking can contribute to any one of those chronic diseases. And the last, which is of course where the focus of my talk is today, is on diet. And remember that you are what you eat. So when I'm working with patients, I am giving them interventions, nutraceutical interventions, but I'm also reviewing with them what I consider to be their foundations of health. This has to happen. And of course, diet is number 1 for me. This is where I go with my patients. This is what we spend a lot of time doing. You can add a whole bunch of different supplements in, but if you're not changing that cornerstone, if that is not shifting, it's going to be very challenging. It's what we call obstacles to cure. So having a good diet is foundational to health. But again, we know that activity is important, getting adequate sleep is critical for health and healing, managing your stress, avoiding toxins, having good detox processes through the body, and having a community or social network. And of course, I added in there, other question mark, because everyone has their own individual factors that affect their own health. For some folks, it can be hobbies, it can be spiritual, it can be singing. There are so many things that can impact your own personal health and well-being. But again, I am strongly in favor of the diet piece. So the concept of food as medicine is not just associated with Hippocrates, it's not just associated with naturopathic doctors. We see this in a few different traditions and schools of medicine. Some of you may be familiar with Ayurvedic medicine. It's based on something called individual doshas or constitutional types, and they look at as food as being information to balance their individual constitutional types. When we look at traditional Chinese medicine, we also see food as medicine. It comes up a lot. It's about how can you balance your body. I'm sure everyone here has heard of that yin and yang. And what we're trying to do with that is balance our own internal energy. And we can use food and the tastes associated with food to do that. Okay, and so where I'm most familiar with using food as medicine, of course, is what I practice, which is naturopathic medicine, where we consider the food that we eat to be valuable, health-promoting information. Right? What we want to give our body is nutrients, not the anti-nutrients that have become so common. When Dave talks about sugar, I consider that an anti-nutrient. So we didn't, like I said before, just fall into 2015. There's been a lot that's brought us to this place. I am very fascinated personally by what I call food evolution. How did we get here? How did we used to eat? How did we end up at this place? So where are we right now? We're down there at SAD. What does SAD stand for? SAD is what we talk about, and this is what it looks like to me. But SAD is Standard or American Diet, right? It's a Western pattern diet. It's a meat, processed meat, sweet type of diet. But it wasn't always like that, okay? It really wasn't like that. When I say agricultural revolution, I'm talking about something that happened around 10,000 BC. So, you know, if you think about the hunter-gatherer stage as being from about 2 million BC all the way up to that agricultural revolution in 10,000 BC, which is a really long period of time, that's where we were eating plants and wild meats and tubers and shrubs and insects and small reptiles and small mammals. And then in the agricultural revolution, we stopped being so nomadic. We settled down. We started keeping animals and planting crops. And our diet changed from being a better ratio of plant to animal. We were probably in the earlier part, we were like 65 plant to maybe 35 animal. It all of a sudden switched to being, you know, at some points 90% plant, again, cultivated plants, and 10% wild game or wild meats. And again, over the years, this has shifted. But from our ancestry, you can see we spent a larger part of our time from 2 million, like I said, to 10,000 BC, having a certain pattern of diet. And it's really been only in the last 150 years or so that we've been following this Western pattern diet. So this is what I feel when my patients tell me sometimes about what they eat. And this is what we consider our modern food. And this is not to single out Cheese Whiz or the Golden Arches or Twinkies. We could put a lot of food on there. What am I considering to be our modern food? Well, convenience food, right? Processed food, high sugar food, food that's devoid of fiber, food, meats that are processed, full of nitrates, things like that. We all know what that is. And if you have any questions of what that is, you can ask me afterwards. We wonder, and my patients always ask me, so what can I eat? What should I eat? What should my plate look like? This is not perfect, okay? This is from the 2011 guidelines from the USDA, so this is not Canadian, this is American. And this is probably outdated, and in my mind, it's not ideal. But this is one image that I will share with my patients to give them an idea of what their plate should look like. I'm sure most of you in this room remember the food pyramid. I grew up on the food pyramid. Very hard to follow. You know, servings, and then there was the ladder after that. This is the latest incarnation of that. It's made to help people get more familiar with a serving size. Do I agree with it? It's better than, you know, that really big base of grains that we've seen so far. I'd like to see the dairy potentially replaced with healthy fats. I think that would be an improvement. There's nowhere in there that talks about fat. I'd like to see more vegetables, so maybe that could be nudged up a little bit. And maybe a little bit more protein in there too. So I think it's a starting point, but if anyone's trying to work on their plate, this is an interesting place to start. The reason I mention this is because my next slide is going to talk about superfoods. And I feel like superfoods, I struggle with the word. Patients often say to me, is this food super? As though there's some absolute, you know, someone is the authority on it. I am not the authority on superfoods. I have an idea of what makes a food super. You all might have ideas of what makes a food super. I promise you, every time you open the newspaper, there's a new food that's touted as being super. It's hard to keep up with it, frankly, I think. But in my mind, what makes a food super? Well, often, and unfortunately, I would say mushrooms are not don't hit the first one for color, but usually I would say most of our superfoods are brightly colored. We know this to be true. They're orange, they are green, they are red, they're purple. They are the colors of the rainbow. Our superfoods, or foods that I consider to be super, are also going to be nutritionally dense, right? They're going to be dense and they're also going to be diverse. So what do I mean by that? I mean they're going to be chock full of phytonutrients, compounds. All of these compounds together are going to have a nice synergistic effect that's going to decrease inflammation in our body, act as antioxidants, support our detox processes like our liver, and so on. So it's a tall order for a food, but a lot of our brightly colored fruits and vegetables can do that. And of course, they'll contain a variety of phytonutrients like I just mentioned. So as I said, I don't feel personally as though there is an absolute list on these superfoods. These are just a few that I think are pretty great. Broccoli, but of course, I don't want to leave out the rest of the brassica family vegetables. So that includes our kales, our Brussels sprouts, our cabbage, our berries, right? Anything that's very antioxidant rich and brightly colored. Our nuts, but I feel like often the seeds are left out. They're my little favorite cousins of the nuts. Our pumpkin seeds, our sunflower seeds, our chia seeds, our hemp seeds. Does anyone know what that yellow powder is in the corner? You don't get to answer the questions, Dave. Yes, absolutely. Turmeric, right. Brightly pigmented. And of course our mushroom, but it's not my most favorite picture of a mushroom. I will show you some other beautiful mushrooms in a moment. What are some of your favorite superfoods? I'm sure everyone here has a food that they add to their diet every day.
Sauerkraut.
Sauerkraut, excellent. Sorry? Sunflower seeds, lovely. Blueberries. Coconut, yes, coconut. And coconut oil.
Brazilian nuts.
I'm sorry.
Brazilian nuts.
Brazilian nuts. Brazil nuts, great source of zinc and selenium, absolutely. Okay, anyone on this side? You guys. Anyone over here? Flax seeds, excellent. Spirulina, so the microgreens, algae, absolutely, yes. So if you go on WebMD and you look at superfoods, they put things like salmon, yams, broccoli, spinach. So stuff that's pretty readily available, you know, but in the last few years, we've seen the addition of a lot of other superfoods. We've seen goji berries and maca and what else, Dave, do you have in the store? That's I'm forgetting. Okay, don't worry about it. I think my acai, excellent. So my point is, I think my point really is, there are so many lovely foods out there. Please take that plate and make it as colorful and diverse and dense as you can. That's my point. And then enjoy it, and it'll be delicious. So when we're talking, and I wanted to mention this, and then we're going to dive into our mushroom talk more specifically. Again, this was the context for getting you excited to use your food as your medicine, understanding that food is going to be one of those modifiable factors for those chronic diseases. That's, again, why I'm emphasizing this so much. I want to remind everyone, though, that it's my belief that it's really critical that we choose high quality, organic where possible, non-GMO where possible foods if we are going to choose these superfoods. Why is that so critical? Where we know that our air, our soil, and our water are potential sources of toxins. Okay? And we know that the food, as I said before, is the information for our body that's going to help to protect our body. And it is my belief that all of these added pesticides, herbicides, fungicides are really going to be potentially neurotoxic, carcinogenic, and again, if we are choosing a food based on its ability to support our health so much, it really seems counterintuitive to choose something that has added toxins in it. So it's why, in part, I'm so excited to talk about this line, because it is certified organic. So this is one last quote from Hippocrates, which is, if we give every individual the right amount of nourishment and exercise, not too little and not too much, we would have found the safest way to health. So I really take that to heart, and that's how I approach practice. So this is a really interesting picture. Has anyone seen this image before? Not you. This is an image that was found in a cave in Algeria. It's a cave drawing, and they think it was made about 7,000 years ago. And when the anthropologists were trying to understand what it depicted, what they saw, or what they've described it as, is they say it's a bee shaman, a bee man, who they say sort of has sort of a shamanistic vibe. I don't think they use those words, that's my language. A bee man, a shaman, who has an electrified mushroom aura about him. Okay? So the point is that even 7,000 years ago, there were two foods that were considered to be quite quite special and elevated above others: the bee and the honey from the bees and the mushrooms. So even though 7,000 years ago, there was not the ability to really understand the compounds in mushrooms or how they may contribute to our health, there was an understanding that there were powerful food medicines, and that consumption of them kind of broached that sort of culinary medicinal, they possess both of those qualities. So I just think that's such a unique picture, and it is, if you're familiar with Paul's books, he has a beautiful image of it inside. In Chinese medicine, which I alluded to earlier, we see the use of mushrooms pretty extensively. So Chinese medicine, where you have texts written 400 BC, for example, they speak a fair amount about reishi. They speak a fair amount about cordyceps. So these are two mushrooms in particular that were quite popular. They were so popular and considered to be so prized that they were reserved for the nobility. So if you were found to be in possession, for example, of the reishi mushroom, you could be sentenced to death. So again, these were very special, very prized, and they were really not for public consumption. I challenge anyone in the back row to read this because it's quite small print, but this is what we call our tree of life. Has anyone seen this before? Okay, so the tree of life, I'm not going to step up on stage. I don't know if the folks with the camera will be able to see me, but if you can see up in that top right-hand corner, this is where we've come from. Can I go onto the stage for a moment? Yes? At the back. Chris? Yeah? Well, I don't know if that'll do anyone good, but if you, yeah, there we go. So if you can see up there, animals and fungi, or fungi, and plants are all the way up here. So we diverged, and when I say we, I mean animals, diverged from plants over 1 billion years ago, right? We diverged. But look how relatively recently we diverged from fungi. They say we diverged, and I'm going to say fungi, I'm never quite sure how I like to say it. We diverged from fungi about 650 million years ago. So we are more closely connected to the mushroom kingdom than to plants. We share about 10% of the same DNA with plants, which is pretty cool. Some people report that we share between 30 and 50% of the same DNA as mushrooms. 30 to 50%. I think that's pretty significant. So we're more closely related to the fungi or fungi kingdom than to plants. And the reason why that's significant is that they can contract, or we can contract, some of the same diseases. They can get staph infections. They can be exposed to strep. They can get exposed to other fungi. So what has been very interesting to observe, what mycologists, people who study mushrooms, have observed, is that they have developed a very different way of managing and interacting with other, I'll say, assaults or challenges. Maybe that's a little bit more of a peaceful way of putting it. Whereas animals have, and remember, in medicine, we like to be very reductionistic. We talk about the immune system and we talk about the digestive system as though they're two totally separate entities. We have developed what we term an intracellular or intraorganism response to challenges. We consume our food, it goes into our body, we inhale and we take in foreign challenges. Again, I'm using that term loosely. Mushrooms behave very differently. They are what is termed extracellular. They secrete substances in response to challenges or assaults. It doesn't go in them, they meet it and they secrete. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to explain that a little bit further. So again, we came from the same place, but our immune and digestive systems have evolved in a very different way. And what mycologists have found is that fungi, or the earlier part of the mushroom life cycle, which we call mycelia, they consider that their digestive and immune systems are one in the same. They are literally digesting and managing their environment at the same time. And isn't that interesting when now research is coming out showing that the digestive system is the seat of our immune system, that 60 to 80% of our immune system resides in our gut. So I find it very interesting, peculiar, but I mean peculiar in a really cool and neat and good way, but it's interesting to look at how they manage challenges. I don't think I'm going to cover every single one of these points. The point of this and the next slide is hopefully to cast a wide net for you all with mushrooms. I think, for very good reason, mushrooms have been put on a pedestal and have been sort of explained to people as being beneficial for the immune system. And this is absolutely correct. Their use in oncology and immunology has really, I don't want to say exploded, but really people are using it. As Dave pointed out, it's being used in studies. I've got the link to the study, or a few studies if people are interested and curious. So people are seeing very meaningful results. But my point here is I don't want you to think that they are only used for those things. We have evidence to support their use across a wide range of systems. And this is partly what appeals to me, and this is, in my mind, what makes mushrooms so super. They have a wide range of action, and they have a wide range of effects on the body. So if we're specifically looking at oncology, which is cancer, we do have evidence to show that some mushrooms can reduce tumors. We know that some mushrooms seem to protect patients after chemotherapy and radiation, meaning they seem to bolster the immune system after patients have gone through treatment. We know that they can induce something called apoptosis. Apoptosis is a fancy word for having a cell, like inducing cell death. Right? So killing those cancer cells. So this is really good, meaningful information and news for individuals who are looking for complementary treatments for cancer care. Immunology. So as you may or may not know, broadly speaking, we have two branches of our immune system. We have a branch called our innate immune system, and we have a branch called our acquired immune system. We all are born with an innate immune system. We all then develop acquired or memory-based immunity, right? You got chickenpox as a child. The theory goes that now you have antibodies and you should not contract it again. When new infections are presented to us that we've never seen before, our bodies must rely on our innate immune system to deal with it. If you have poor innate immunity, you're going to catch everything that's going around. In the innate immune system, we have two cell lines. We have our natural killer cells, our NK cells, and the second one, the macrophages, that are very, very critical for keeping us healthy. Think of those natural killer cells as being the sharpshooters of the immune system. So they're just looking around for anything that doesn't belong. The macrophages are what we call our big eaters. They're just going around and eating out everything. You don't belong here. Gulp, gulp, gulp. So one's more of a sharpshooter, a little bit more of a sniper. One's just gulping everything up. They're critical for the innate branch, right? We know that some mushrooms can stimulate their activity. It recruits them and encourages them to work more. So it brings them to the site and gets them to work harder. Really, really important, really important. Okay, but beyond immunology and oncology, we see other great benefits. So we see benefits for the heart, so specifically cardiovascular system or cardiology. I was just mentioning that cardiovascular disease is one of those 4 main chronic diseases. This is really important. We know that this can help folks by lowering, some people have noted that their diastolic blood pressure can come down when they're on a certain mushroom. We know that can stop things called platelets from aggregating. That's a fancy way of saying getting your blood sticky. So this can thin out blood for some folks. We also know that it has the ability to stop the oxidation of that LDL cholesterol. So again, poor cholesterol, it's been really vilified, but now we know it's not just the cholesterol that's the issue, it's what's happening in the body. It's how it's getting oxidized that's creating those sticky plaques in our blood vessels. And so when it gets oxidized, that's when we get problems. So it can stop that from happening. So this is really important and good news for folks with cardiovascular disease. So switching trains of thought totally, we also have gynecology or reproductive health and well-being. So again, beyond just immune system, beyond the cardiovascular system, we also have reproductive health. So I have seen many families who are looking for support with fertility and they're looking at options. And the good news is the body of research around complementary fertility interventions is growing. You see people, men using things like zinc and carnitine and arginine, and you see here folks using things like CoQ10. Well, mushrooms now is being included in that, right? A mushroom like cordyceps, which I'll talk about, has some really good evidence behind it. So helping with hormone balancing, helping with egg and sperm health quality, so really important for some couples. What was missing from that previous slide was the support for the respiratory system, and I want to mention that because chronic respiratory diseases is also one of those chronic major diseases. So again, I want to mention that some mushrooms have been shown to have a real affinity for the lungs. So improving oxygen uptake, helping to decrease the spasm in the lungs, and so helping folks with chronic asthma or reactive airway disease. So very, very important. When I say gastroenterology, I'm really referring to the entire digestive system. So this is quite a broad system or area where we can see benefits. So where specifically I like to focus is on the ability of some mushrooms to support or ameliorate phase 2 liver detox. So this is really important for hormone balancing, for mood, for really so many things, and for detoxing. We also know that some mushrooms can really help with ulcer reduction. So that's very exciting for some folks. I think neurology, and I would say neurology or the central nervous system support, is also very critical and interesting for folks. There's some really neat studies that are happening down in California looking at some mushrooms, specifically lion's mane, with dementia and potentially Alzheimer's. We know that it can stimulate nerve regrowth factor, so this is going to be good for traumatized nerves and helping people to heal. Folks with neuropathy or anesthesia, so lack of sensation or altered sensation, this can happen to folks because of diabetes, right, in their toes or their feet. So there's a really big role to play for interventions, natural interventions, to help people with these chronic diseases. I would add that psychology is very closely and intimately connected with neurology, and we know that some mushrooms can very much help with energy, mood. There's been some really interesting studies to show that it can help mild to moderate anxiety, mild to moderate depression, and certainly stress, right? So I know you all had a talk about stress last month, and I would say that mushrooms can be a really great intervention for cortisol balancing. So that's very exciting. And then last but certainly not least, I would mention that as a superfood, mushrooms can be helpful for, as you know, from a broadly speaking, for nutrition. So what does that mean? Well, it means that they can be a good source of micronutrients. So some mushrooms are high in selenium, B2, B3, folate. But beyond that, we see that some mushrooms can help with insulin modulation and balance. So this is going to be really important for folks who are pre-diabetic or have type 2 diabetes, or are at risk for developing diabetes. I promise I will not test you on this, but I think it's really important that you all have at least a general understanding and appreciation for the mushroom life cycle. So I want you to pretend like you're back in high school biology and try to appreciate this life cycle. And the point of understanding this is because as a consumer, you are going to want to understand what the product is offering you. And whether you choose Host Defense mushrooms or you elect to go with another brand, as a consumer, you should be able to look at the bottle and understand what's in that product, because the language that will be on there. So I'm sure everyone so if we use the life cycle as a clock, and if I'm looking roughly in the 8 o'clock position, and I'm looking at what's called the fruit body of the mushroom, right? So that's what people must associate with mushrooms. So you see the cap, and on the underside are what's called the gills. So what's the fruit body for? The fruit body is for reproduction. That's really what it's for. And on the underside of that cap, where those gills are the spores. The spores are ejected into the surrounding environment. You see them almost around 12 o'clock in that little circle. And they land in the forest floor, and they start to elongate. They become what's called hyphae, right? Those rods around 12 o'clock. So what has to happen is two compatible hyphae have to meet and they mate, right? Sounds a bit like an animal, eh? And then they start to become more filamentous. They become more mesh-like. So now we're around the 1, 2 o'clock position. You see how it's becoming more of a net, what they call a network, and what is now called mycelia. Remember earlier I was talking about mushrooms, digestive and immune systems are sort of like one and the same? What mycologists refer to as the mycelia is the immune and digestive system of the mushroom. And it is the mycelial mat that grows along the forest floor and interacts with its environment. So if I'm mycelia and I'm growing and I'm moving towards, you look very nice, but if I'm moving towards you and I deem you to be foe, I secrete enzymes, amino acids, and antimicrobial substances in response to her presence. And mycelia are exceptionally dynamic. I will then move away from her and I'll move over here. And maybe you're a fungus and maybe you're not the same fungus as me. And so again, I'll secrete substances. So when you look at an image called an electron micrograph of mycelia, really, really zoomed in, first of all, it's beautiful, but it looks like fine little nets or filaments with little beads on it. It looks like it's sweating. So remember, our system is intra, mycelia is extra. It sort of shoots it out in response to the environment. It's really, really neat. So the mycelia, around 3 o'clock, if I'm using the time analogy, it starts to clump together, okay? And it's pretty hard to see, but as it gets to around 4 o'clock, it starts to, and I'm using this term loosely, it starts to bud up into what's called a baby mushroom, or what they call a primordia. Okay? And then pretty much from that 4 o'clock all the way back to the 8 o'clock, that baby mushroom grows, it buds, and grows bigger into its fulminant fruit body stage. So why is this all important for you all? Well, for you all to know, what is really key about the life cycle is that different compounds or valuable constituents are associated with different phases of the mushroom life cycle. So when we are in the mycelial stage, we are able to harness those enzymes, amino acids, and antimicrobial substances that I was referring to earlier. When we are in the fruit body stage, we're able to harness compounds called polysaccharides and glycoproteins and sterols. I'm sure most of you have heard of things like beta-glucans. That's a type of polysaccharide. Okay? Both compounds, those found in the mycelia and those in the fruit body, are valuable. So what do? Well, mycologists like Paul Stamets have studied the mushroom life cycle, and they know that at that very early budding stage, that area around 4 o'clock, that's when you get the perfect intersection of mycelial compounds and fruit body compounds, just as the baby mushroom is starting to bud. Okay? So what's really important as consumers for you to know is, and the question to ask is, what is in my product? Is it all fruit body? Is it early mycelia? When are you harvesting your mushrooms? And so what I can tell you about Paul Stamets mushrooms is he's harvesting it at around 4 o'clock, where you're going to get the full range of compounds associated with the mushroom life cycle. So that's the take home for you all. I promise I won't test you on any of the nomenclature. That's the point. You're going to get the full range of compounds associated with the life cycle, which is really unique and really special because historically, most folks used exclusively the fruit bodies. Now, are the fruit bodies good? They're great. I'm not going to tell you they're not good. But you are missing out on all the really fabulous immune supporting properties associated with the mycelia. So I think it's really intelligent and correct to harvest at an earlier point. Okay? So when you look at the ingredients, specifically of the host defense mushrooms, when you turn the box around, what you're going to see on the ingredients list is myceliated brown rice. So you might say, but I thought she said it was in the baby mushroom save. Well, it is. The correct terminology, though, is still that it's myceliated, okay? Brown rice refers to the medium that it's being grown on. Remember, mushrooms are pretty easygoing. They'll grow pretty much on anything. They can grow on trees, on tree stumps, wood chips, sawdust, rice, any starch-rich or polysaccharide-rich medium, that's what they're going to use as their food source. So Paul grows his mushrooms on organic brown rice. So that's what it says in the ingredients. So this is just an FYI to you all to be savvy consumers. So I alluded to some of the compounds, so I'm just going to remind you of them. Because again, what I like to do is empower my patients, my consumers, with information so that you have a better sense of what you're looking for and why. So polysaccharides, those are found, again, remember I said predominantly in the fruit body, but again, they are there where we harvest it. And probably polysaccharides, specifically the beta-glucans, are what people, they've gotten a lot of press, and for good reason. We know they are tremendously immune modulating. So we know that they pack a really tremendous immune punch. Really good for recruiting those natural killer and macrophage cells. So the way they work is quite neat. They don't get absorbed. Our body does not have the enzyme to break down and absorb beta-glucans. The way they work, and again, this is where this neat interface between the immune system and the digestive system happens for us, is beta-glucans brush up against our enterocytes, the cells that line our digestive tract. And in doing so, they create a signal that recruits natural killer cells. They get recruited and they get told to activate and to stimulate their numbers and activity. So really quite amazing how they get their activity. It's not because we absorb them and they go into our bloodstream. They are not absorbed. Glycoproteins, again, fancy word for like a sugar attached to a protein. Again, these have also been shown to have tremendous immune modulating effect. And again, we know a mushroom like maitake has quite a good glycoprotein profile. Triterpenes, or what we call triterpenoid compounds, have a very similar structure to cortisone. I'm sure many of you have heard of cortisone, have used cortisone yourself. What is cortisone actually quite good for? Well, it's really good at suppressing inflammation in the body. So a lot of mushrooms, and I would say reishi, in my mind, is the one that has the most diverse triterpenoid compounds that I'm aware of. It's probably why some mushrooms have such wonderful anti-inflammatory activity. So some of mushrooms have been shown to inhibit or decrease COX-2. So really get us out of that pro-inflammatory cascade and promote healing. Right? So they have, if you look at them, they have a very similar structure to cortisone. So really neat. They also have antihistaminic effects in the body. So again, this anti-inflammatory effect. They're also a rich source of sterols. So sterols, again, precursor to cholesterol. So really the hormone precursor in the body. So really quite good if you are, we know now cholesterol is actually quite important. We know that for hormone balancing, you need adequate cholesterol. And then again, we're going to see those enzymes, amino acids, and antimicrobial substances that are associated with the mycelial part of the life cycle. So we're going to get a really gorgeous range of compounds, and this is when I was talking earlier about what makes a food super. In my mind, this nutrient profile makes mushrooms so superior. So this is Paul Stamets. His picture's on the side of the box. You can look at him on YouTube. You can't really talk about host defense mushrooms without talking about Paul. Paul's holding a mushroom. That's a fruit body, which is amazing. It's about close to 100 years old, and it's a garicon. So it's gorgeous. So Paul Stamets, just in case anyone here is not familiar with him, he is a mycologist. He studies mushrooms for a living. He's been studying mushrooms for well over 30 years. He is the author of 6 books, and if you do a quick search, his books are like the most popular books on mushrooms. They're always the #1 selling books for mushrooms. His most recent book is called Mycelium Running. It's fabulous. Every time if I'm out in public and I have the book, every time I have it, somebody says to me, "That's a gorgeous book. Where did you get that?" So it just has great pictures, and it's got lots of good information. So Paul, I've spent some time with him, and he's an amazing guy, and I would say he is very keen to understand how mushrooms can impact human health. But I would say before that, Paul is an environmentalist. So why do I say that? I say that because Paul has devoted most of his career to trying to understand how we can better work in harmony with nature and how mushrooms can help us heal ourselves and heal our planet. And if you look at his most recent book, he has entire chapters on what he calls mycoforestation, myco-restoration. He's doing all sorts of amazing things with mushrooms. He's using mushrooms to clean up E. coli in water. He's using mushrooms to clean up oil spills. He's using mushrooms to grow plant life where there was none. It's phenomenal and very, very inspiring. And a lot of the grants that he's receiving is to do with this environmental work. So he's a pretty remarkable guy, and he is exceptionally well respected within the industry. So his name is really synonymous with mushrooms, usually, and when you see the picture of him on the side of the box, he's wearing his sort of trademark hat, which is made from mushrooms, and I've spent several weekends with him, and I've really personally never seen him take them off, so it's pretty amazing. He's devoted his life to studying mushrooms and to better understand them. And the reason I talk about that is because as consumers, I think it's really important for you to understand where your food and your supplements are coming from. I think the theme of transparency is becoming more and more pressing for consumers. I think you have the right to know where your medicines are coming from, and I think you should be asking where your medicines come from. And I think it's still quite rare within our industry to be what we call vertically integrated. So vertical integration means that a company is doing everything in-house. So what do I mean by that? So the opposite of vertical integration is outsourcing. And that is the standard in our globalized economy. It's a reality. And it doesn't mean it's bad. Companies, sorry, that keep going up and down with my voice. So companies outsource for very good reasons. They outsource because it allows them to cut costs and then hopefully pass that on to the consumer. There are a few companies within our industry that are vertically integrated. What that means is that there's a very clear, what we call chain of custody within the company. It means they're doing everything in-house. They're not having someone source their mushrooms from them. They're not having someone powder their mushrooms. They're not having someone encapsulate it. The buck stops there. It all happens in one place, and it doesn't leave to go to you until it's in a box. I think that's phenomenal as a consumer and as a healthcare provider. So Host Defense, Fungi Perfecti, which is this company, is vertically integrated. Paul searches for the mushrooms. He processes the mushrooms. Well, probably he doesn't personally do it. His company does. And then it goes out from his company. It's really quite remarkable. Really, really, really important. It's literally about going from the forest to the consumer. So where is Paul located? Paul's company is located in the Pacific Northwest, in Washington State. So everything is coming from the United States. Really important also, again, ask the tough questions. Where are mushrooms coming from? A lot of folks are buying mushrooms from overseas and bringing them over. Again, is that automatically bad? No, but you should have the right to ask the questions. A lot of people buy their mushrooms from China. When you buy produce from overseas, when it comes to North America, it must be irradiated to destroy any extra junk that's hanging around on it, okay? It's really amazing that Paul's mushrooms are coming from Washington State. He doesn't have to do that. So I mentioned that Paul is first and foremost an environmentalist. So how does he reconcile selling mushrooms with being an environmentalist? This is, again, something that's important that we talk about openly within our industry, and I don't always think it's talked about, so I won't spend too much time on this. But again, I think as consumers, I think it's important to ask the questions. We have a lot of foods, and as I mentioned, superfoods that we talk about, and we don't always say, where is it coming from? We don't always say, how did that get to my store or my plate? Paul developed a method where he doesn't have to go in and what he feels is damage the forest. So a lot of folks will wildcraft. What does that mean? It means they'll go out into the forest and they will take and they'll bring it back. It sounds gorgeous and it really is quite lovely, and I think it's very appropriate for personal consumption. Paul wants to send mushrooms to the masses, and he can't do both. He doesn't feel comfortable going into the woods and taking from nature. The footprint is just too big. So the way he's reconciled that is he's developed a way where he can go out into the forest and he can take a tissue sample. So the tissue sample is pretty much like the size of my nail. And he puts it in a test tube and he brings it back to his lab. And what happens is then he starts to grow that mushroom out in his lab on organic agar-agar. And the good thing about that, because even though it's coming from the pristine Olympic rainforest, it still is exposed to the air, the soil, and the water, right? Which, again, is ambient, so it's not organic. But by growing it on organic agar-agar in his lab, he's able to render it organic. And then he introduces it to the organic brown rice and it grows out in a clean room. So there is a trade-off, I will admit. I think there's a trade-off between getting a wild mushroom versus a lab-grown mushroom. But we need to remember that there are environmental implications to getting wild mushrooms. And I would also say that we need to be very mindful of what is in and on our mushrooms. Mushrooms are like sponges. This is part of what makes them so amazing and so unique for environmental applications. There have been mushrooms. One of the neatest things I ever read was they assayed a mushroom that was found in and around Chernobyl. And it was able to bioaccumulate cesium beyond their wildest expectations. I don't quite remember the number, and I don't want to misrepresent it. It was able to bioaccumulate a heavy metal. So what you want to be careful with is you want to make sure if you are going to consume mushrooms that it is organic. Because it's just going to take up cadmium, arsenic, heavy metals, things that you just don't want to put in your body. So I think that that's all I'll say right now about the wildcrafting concerns. And if you have any more questions about process, I can answer that after. But just to, again, let you know where the mushrooms are being grown. So I talked about the importance of organic, and I talk about how they reflect their environment. And I did mention how they are being grown in a clean room with a HEPA filter, where the air is being cleaned and recycled, not really recycled, but cleaned out every 20 minutes. So this is really, really clean medium. So organic brown rice, clean water, clean air. They play classical music to the mushrooms as they grow. So pretty neat. So they have these large bags, they put the brown rice in it, and they make slits in it, and the mushrooms grow out. Pretty awesome stuff. So as I said, really simple question to ask is, where are your mushrooms grown, where do they come from, and where in the life cycle are they harvested? So hopefully you all have that information in your back pocket now. So I'm mindful of time, and I know we got started a little bit late. So I think what I want to do with the rest of my time, because I have about 10 minutes left, right? Yep. I'm going to show you some pictures of mushrooms. I'm going to give you a few take-homes on each mushroom, and at the end I'll answer any further questions you might have. Because I think if I just give you everything about every single mushroom, it's going to start to all sound the same after a little while, okay? So this is reishi. It's gorgeous, right? It's really, really, really beautiful. Reishi, as I said, is probably the mushroom that even folks who didn't know that they knew about mushrooms probably have heard about, right? It's in a lot of adaptogenic formulas, so those formulas that are good for your adrenal glands. And where you'll see the claim, so as you might or might not know, now with Health Canada, all natural health products have to have something called an NPN number. It means we have to be able to write something on the box, we have to apply to make the claim, which means we have to have evidence to support that claim. So our claim on the bottle, though, is about heart health. Does that mean that reishi is only good for heart health? No. Remember, I said it has all those triterpenoid compounds, so it's going to be a great anti-inflammatory. It's going to be good, of course, for heart health. It's going to be a great adaptogen, so it's going to help with stress modulation. Okay? Reishi is going to be good for general energy. It is probably the one that people choose the most, which is why I put it first. It's the one that people feel really grounded with. Historically in Chinese medicine, people used it to support what's called their Wei Qi. Wei Qi in Chinese medicine is your defensive energy. And the belief in Chinese medicine is that you have energy out here that's kind of protecting you from assaults, physical assaults, emotional assaults. So people talk about reishi as holding up their Wei Qi, which I think is just a great image, and I love this idea of using something that's going to just shore up your defenses a little bit. So reishi is one of my favorite, and it's one of the ones that I use the most with my patients. I kind of laugh when I see this picture, because I've had some folks be like, oh my, what is that? Because it has some interesting associations with it. So this is cordyceps. Okay, cordyceps is the mushroom that has the affinity to the lungs. So think of asthma, think of COPD. Think of anyone who's looking to take up more oxygen. Where I use cordyceps the most would be for my patients who are looking for more stamina, more vigor. I have a lot of patients who are athletes and training. They're looking for more endurance, right? This is going to help you to train a little bit harder. I know that's a bit of an intense claim to make. So I guess maybe what I mean by that is that because we know that cordyceps helps you to take up more oxygen, it's going to help with stamina. Okay? We talk about it as being good for vigor. And probably not surprisingly, cordyceps is the mushroom that has been associated with improved reproductive health function. Remember I was talking earlier about egg and sperm health and quality. This is the one that's being used in studies to support the egg and sperm health. So really neat stuff. I know some reproductive endocrinologists that are using this with their patients. Lion's mane, in my mind, is one of the most beautiful mushrooms. It just cascades down, and it's just like, you just want to touch it and put your hands all over it. The way to remember lion's mane will be very easy. Obviously, the lion's mane will be around their head. So I want you to associate lion's mane with the brain and neurology and the central nervous system. Lion's mane is the mushroom that's being used in the studies for dementia. Okay? The jury is still out on the optimal dosage, but we are seeing some pretty encouraging results where lion's mane is helping folks with cognition. So mild memory impairments, mild to moderate anxiety, mild to moderate depression. It also, as I was mentioning earlier, seems to have a very valuable role with nerve trauma. So people who have been in accidents, motor vehicle accidents, people who have traumatized nerves, people who have neuropathy, lion's mane becomes very handy. So this is the mushroom that Paul was holding up in that picture. This is agarikon, okay? Remember I was talking about how it's so important that we approach this sustainably? Well, think of agarikon. It has a fruit body. It can go up to 100 years. If you went and harvested that, it would take an awfully long time to get the next really beautiful big agarikon. There are real implications to going and getting this out in the woods. So agarikon is we actually just recently launched agarikon as its own. It's been a part of several formulas before, but I'm super excited that we've launched it because agarikon is the mushroom that I want you to think of when you're thinking of stubborn viral infections. Okay? Lots of interesting evidence to show that it's good for things like herpes zoster, chicken pox, people with cold sores, just overall nasty, resistant upper respiratory tract infections, which often are viral in nature. I'm sure most of you in this room have had or know someone who has that 3-week cough. It's like the cough that just doesn't go away, doesn't get better no matter what you do. Think of agarikon for that. This is not the most beautiful looking one, but has a really good role to play. This is chaga. Okay, chaga. What does it look like? It's black, it's nasty, it sort of gets right in there. It grows fairly symbiotically with beech and birch trees. Again, when I talk about the sustainability angle, if people were to go and to the woods and they were to just chop that off, you could leave that tree really vulnerable. So it's really important that we're careful with our chaga. Chaga and turkey tail are both, which is gorgeous, doesn't always look blue though, more often looks brown, depends what it grows on. I want you to think of chaga and turkey tail as being really gorgeous antioxidants. They're going to help with tissue repair. They're going to support phase 2 liver detox, and they're going to decrease COX-2, so they're going to decrease inflammation in the body. Turkey tail, as you may have heard from Dave, is the one that's being used in the phase 1 clinical trial. So Tramedes versicolor. Really encouraging results have already come out that shows that turkey tail, when used post-chemo and post-radiation, really helps immune systems bounce back. So now they're starting a trial to see, can it be used adjunctively? Can it be used at the same time to protect the body, to amplify the effect of treatment? Can it help? Because there are some interventions that require natural killer cells to be more effective. Can this intervention recruit more natural killer cells and help the chemotherapy? That's the question. So really interesting stuff. And again, I'm giving you a slice. If you're interested in learning more, I would highly encourage you to buy one of Paul's books. His, what we call Materia Medica, on these individual mushrooms is very extensive. So he talks a lot about all of their applications. So I'm talking just about breast cancer, but he has support for their use in various lymphomas, prostate cancer. The list goes on and on. I'm giving you a sliver. I'm just moving through these slides again because I want to leave time for questions at the end. So the reason why I put these three together is because I was just talking about individual mushrooms, but these three products are combine several mushrooms together. So the first is our Stamets 7, then it's our My Community, and it's our Myco Shield. So how do you know which one to use? Well, the Stamets 7 is what I would consider to be your mushroom multi. So what do I mostly put my patients on? Vitamin D, oil, probiotic, a mushroom. Pretty much most of my patients get that. There's always exceptions to the rule, but that's always a good foundation for starting. Stamets 7, and again, it may be hard for folks in the back to see, or for most people to see, contains 7 mushrooms. Cordyceps reishi, lion's mane, maitake, chaga, and then 2 that I haven't talked about, so I won't really emphasize those 2. What's neat about using the mushroom multi, it's again, literally using your food as your medicine. So it's a nice way to get a little bit of everything, and we know that there's value in synergy. There's power in synergy. I reserve the My Community for my patients who are most depleted. So whereas the Stamets 7 contains 7 mushrooms, the My Community contains 17. So you are trading off the overall amount, so you're going to get less of each one, but you get a broader range. So again, we're trying to capitalize on that synergy. My Community also contains agarikon. Agarikon, remember, was that one that I talked about for really stubborn viral infections. Stamets 7 doesn't. So some patients, for example, I will put on Stamets 7 from April to November, and if they get a lot of illnesses through the winter, I'll switch them to My Community from November to March, right? Through the cold and flu season, you boost the intervention, and then you ease back as we move into the summer months. Again, that might not be the right protocol for everybody, it's just something I'm offering. The Myco Shield is a spray. It comes in 2 flavors, peppermint or cinnamon, and it is 5 mushrooms put together in liquid. If you're familiar with sprays, you may be expecting something that is very pointed. People refer to this as being more of a fine mist. I had a customer patient the other day laughing. She's like, oh, it's more like a facial because you spray it and it's very misty. So the point is it's going to get on your mucous membranes. Remember, it's going to be our first interaction with a lot of pathogens. So it's going to maybe get up your nose a little bit. It's going to go on your cheeks. It's going to coat your tongue. This is what we want. You're talking to people. I talk to people for a living. I'm on airplanes. You want to create a bit of a shield, right? So it's a really great thing for frequent travelers before and after your work, depending what you do for a living. I know before and after my shifts in clinic, I give myself a little spray. It's always a good thing to do. I have a little clip. Am I able to play it, Dave?
I think so if we put the phone on.
Is that okay? Can you help me with that quickly? It's only 2 minutes. Are we good for that? The reason I wanted to show that video was because I wanted you to see just how beautiful the mushrooms are, and I wanted you to see the Olympic rainforest where the mushrooms are coming from. And I almost get choked up whenever I see those videos. And again, if you go on YouTube, you can see a whole variety of videos that Paul has made. But when you start to think about how beautiful mushrooms are and how we can work with them, it's very encouraging. And so when I gave those fairly grim statistics at the outset, I guess I wanted to counter that with the hope and the optimism that with proper food and nutrition and education, we can make really big changes. So I really thank you all for your time tonight. I will be here answering any questions that you have, and I thank you for your attention. Thanks.